Today, we're going to place Easter juxtaposition to a totally unexpected comparison: baseball. Now, some of you may be saying, "Oh, an Easter sermon on baseball? Oh, it's the best day of my life." Others of you may be saying, "A sermon on baseball? I don't know baseball from badminton." As one of our congregation members said this week when I ran the idea of this theme by him, he said, "Well, I don't know much about baseball, but I have seen damn Yankees. Does that count?" Well, yes, it does. It does count. You don't have to be a baseball fan to hear this sermon. The sermon is for everyone. Sometimes we have to break out of what we know. It's like the old saying, you cannot discover new oceans unless you have the courage to lose sight of the shore. So today we're going to talk about Easter in terms of baseball, and there's a number of reasons that I chose this theme. The first, of course, is the calendar. Today is Easter, and tomorrow is, yes, opening day of Major League Baseball. Both examples of new starts, new possibilities, new life, especially for teams like the Mets. But it's not, well, that's fine, I'm just calling it out, okay? But it's more than just a calendar. In fact, for years, people have talked about baseball like it's a religion. F. Scott Fitzgerald famously called baseball the faith of 50 million people. And who could forget Susan Sarandon's famous opening lines in the movie Bull Durham? "I believe in the church of baseball." Did you know that there are 108 beads in the Catholic Rosary and 108 stitches in a baseball? The only church that truly feeds the soul day in and day out is the church of baseball. Of course, then there's my personal favorite, the great wisdom from the philosopher and scholar, George Carlin. George talked about the spiritual nature of baseball by pointing out the difference in baseball and football. George said, in football, the object is for the quarterback, otherwise known as the field general, to hit his receivers with deadly accuracy and short bullet passes and long bombs, marching his troops into enemy territory. In baseball, the object is to go home and be safe. So arguably, there is a spiritual nature to baseball, but what does it have to do with Easter? Well, 2 weeks ago, I was on Twitter, which every good pastor should be in preparation for Easter, and I found a tweet by my favorite author, Anne Lamott. Some of you may know her. And this is what it said: "Don't ever give up. No matter how bad things look or how long it all takes, grace bats last." Grace bats last. And I just love that phrase. You know, in baseball, they would say grace bats cleanup. The cleanup batter is always the fourth one in the lineup. The first three are the ones we hope get on base. And then all of a sudden the bases are loaded. And the strongest hitter, the power hitter, the cleanup batter steps in to bring the team home. And we've all seen this in some moment like this in baseball, even if you're just living around in the channels. We've seen it where the situation is desperate. The crowd is jeering and yelling insults at the batter. The pitcher's trying his best to take the batters down with curveballs and sliders. And in that moment, when a miracle is needed, the power hitter steps up, cracks the ball on the bat like an earthquake, and brings the team safely home. It's not hard to hear the parallel in the Easter story, because the situation was desperate in Jerusalem. The bases were loaded for Jesus. As everyone had turned against him, the crowd was jeering and ridiculing him. He was betrayed by his followers and facing religious and government leaders who were throwing curveballs and sliders to try to get him to admit wrongdoing. Nothing short of a miracle was needed. And yet, grace stepped in and brought him home. Today, we need that story more than ever. As the great writer and author Barbara Johnson said, we are an Easter people living in a Good Friday world. Just look at the headlines, goodness gracious. 150 students and faculty and bystanders killed by militant extremists outside of Nairobi. A German pilot who, through desperation or depression, took an entire airliner, all of the passengers to their death. We have superpowers fighting over nuclear arms like it's a sandbox fight. Legislators in our country trying to use the law as a weapon to exclude our LGBT brothers and sisters. We have racist text being sent by police officers, not only in Ferguson, but now in San Francisco, and God knows where else. On the flip side, though, I gotta say this. I do want to know that there are police officers out there who are decent, hardworking folk and who deal with some outrageous stuff in their jobs, like this news article I pulled yesterday from this week. ABC News, the headlines, Idaho man calls 911 a dozen times about bar bill. Yes, Philip Poisonay of Post Falls, Idaho, was kicked out of Club Tequila at 1 a.m. on Monday. Apparently, the police told the Spokane, Washington television station that Poisonay then made 12 emergency calls summoning officers to come and discuss his bar tab. In defense, the bartender produced the tab showing that he was charged $30 for the 10 beers he had consumed. I'm like, come to New York City, my friend. Oh my goodness, yet another example that the situation in our world is desperate. Nothing short of a miracle is needed. Of course, the same is true in our own family. Just right here in our little microcosm of MABC, we have people dealing with deep, gut-wrenching loss. We have people facing surgery and tests and all kinds of scary medical issues. We have folks who are struggling with relationship questions and work decisions and financial fears. And then we have our members of this family who every day fight off prejudice and bigotry and just plain meanness. So what are we supposed to take from today that will allow us to stand a little straighter in the face of those difficulties in life? What legacy of the Easter story do we take from baseball? Well, I'm going to offer 3 because I was taught to preach a 3-point sermon. I could offer more, but I'm conscious that many of you have brunch plans. So I'm going to stick with 3 and 3 rather short ones. Lesson number 1, in life, there will always be a jeering crowd. Did I have an amen on that? In life, there will always be a jeering crowd. There will always be pitchers throwing curveballs at us. We think about Jesus, who returned to his hometown of Nazareth and was excluded and ridiculed and turned away by his own people. Or think about Jesus in front of Pilate when the crowd was yelling, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Makes me think of the old saying, beware of the masses, where sometimes the M comes off. That is spelling on that. There will always be people in this world who prefer jealousy over joy. There will always be people who would rather tear us down than build us up. There will always be people like that crowd in Jerusalem who would prefer to destroy rather than delight in something great. The lesson here is keep your eye on the ball. And like the author Seth Goodman said, don't try to delight the undelightable. Don't try to delight the undelightable. Don't let the crowd bully you into thinking you're less than you are. For Jesus taught us in the Beatitudes, blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and say all kinds of evil against you falsely for my name's sake. Lesson number 1, there will always be a jeering crowd. Lesson number 2, we are not alone. not alone. Now we may feel alone. Jesus certainly felt alone on the cross when he cried, my God, why have you forsaken me? We have all felt alone, but in reality, we are not. It's just sometimes we don't see the family around us. It's a great story about the Yankees broadcaster, a guy named Philip Rizzuto. One day, one of his colleagues, while he was in the booth, looked at his scorecard and said, what is that notation? What is that WW in the little box? And Phil was like, oh, it means wasn't watching. Sometimes that's us. Sometimes we aren't watching. Sometimes we just don't see the family around us. But the bottom line is we don't walk alone. We play on a team. And every day we are surrounded by that team of family and friends. We are surrounded by the team in our community of faith, like right here this morning. We are surrounded by an army of angels and archangels. And we are surrounded by the power of grace. Hollywood director Billy Wilder once said, you are as good as the best thing you have ever done. You are as good as the best thing you have ever done. And I love that quote, but I think we should tweak it a little bit. You are as good as the best thing your team has ever done. You are the best thing that your team has ever done. And with this team, nothing is impossible. Remember what Jesus said in Mark 9:23. All things are possible for those who believe. Lesson number 1, there's always going to be a cheering crowd. Lesson number 2, we are not alone when we play on a team where nothing is impossible. And lesson number 3, and maybe the most important, grace bats last. There comes a point in life for each of us where we have trained and fought and worked and sweated, and then that moment comes where we know we've done all we can do, that we've exhausted our gifts, where nothing short of a miracle will do, where we need a cleanup battle. It's like the story that I heard about Babe Ruth. Some of you may be familiar with it. Late in his career, he was pushing 40, God forbid, but apparently baseball, harsh. And Ruth was struggling with health issues. He was overweight, he was drinking too much, and a lot of folks were saying he's washed up. He can't cut it anymore. Well, it was the 5th game of the 1932 World Series between the Yankees and the Cubs. Late in the game, the score was tied 2-2. And the Yankees had done what they could. The team had done what they could. And the cleanup batter, Ruth, stepped to the plate. The crowd went crazy in Chicago, screaming every imaginable insult at him. Apparently, the newscasters were saying they were even throwing food, throwing lemons at him in the box. But the crowd wasn't even as bad as the Chicago bench, which was hurling every imaginable insult at him. Everybody wanted to take him down, including the pitcher. Ruth stood there in the batter's box, taking the full blast of the insults, and then he called the timeout. And he stepped out of the batter's box. And in that moment, Ruth took his bat and he pointed to center field. He pointed to center field. Like he was calling his shot. Like he was saying to all those who were there with him. He stepped back in the box. Pitcher Charles Root wound up his best curveball, and Root with a crack hit it like an earthquake, dead center, all the way in back center field. Just like he had called it the longest home run in Wrigley Field history. Like Babe Ruth's infamous game, there will come a point in life for all of us where we've done all we can, where we've exhausted all our gifts, where the crowds are jeering, where the bases are loaded. But the Easter message this morning is that no matter what the score, no matter who's against us or what curveball or slider has been thrown, grace will step to the plate and bring us home. What places in your life seem desperate right now? do you hear the jeering crowds? What miracles do you await? Let us leave here this beautiful Easter morning remembering that we are part of something bigger. We are part of a team. We are part of a team where all things are possible. We are part of a team where love has the last word. We are part of a team where life trumps death, where the stone has been rolled away, and where hope blossoms forth from a cold, dark time. Thanks to the sacrifice of Good Friday and the resurrection of Easter, let us remember that we all play on a team where grace bats last. And the people said, Amen.